Hi, my name is Catherine Thompson. This is my research project titled Belle Gunness, How a Black Widow Spun Her Web. Early on the morning of April 28, 1908, a farmhouse in LaPorte, Indiana was engulfed by flames. The bodies of 3 young children and a decapitated woman were found within the charred rubble and identified by local authorities as Belle Gunness and her family. Ray Lampier, Gunness's former farmhand and ex-lover, was detained and charged with arson and murder. The trial transcripts no longer exist, however, we do know that Lampier was found guilty of arson but died before the trial for murder. In the months leading up to the trial of the state of Indiana versus Ray Lampier, there would be a nationwide media frenzy, mobs of onlookers at the farm, and the arrest of matrimonial bureau leaders throughout Chicago. However, this would not be attributable to Lampier, but rather as a result of a deeper investigation to the life of Belle and the discovery of the remains of at least a dozen human corpses buried on her farm. Since her death, or rather escape, estimates of Belle's body count have reached upwards of 40, some by way of poison, but more often cold-blooded murder. As established in the research done in the century to follow the trial, the murder farm was a symbolic culmination of the pressures placed on Gunness by life in the early 20th century Midwest and her extreme, grotesque responses to them. Over the few decades that she spent in America, her crimes evolved from property insurance fraud to poisoning to systematic murder and body disposition. In studying the ways in which Gunness and her victims become a part of each other's lives, it's clear that the root of it all is the idea of the American dream, with this Black Widow spinning the narrative that her web held access to it for her lovers while maintaining the comforts of Scandinavia. Following her immigration from Norway to Chicago, Belle Gunness quickly learned how to manipulate the social, economic, and gendered expectations of not only herself, but of her lovers, to sustain a diverse life of crime that would allow her to eventually create a honey trap out of her property in northern Indiana. The woman who would eventually become one of the most prolific serial killers of her era was born to poor farmers in Selbu, Norway on November 11, 1859, and was christened as Brynhild Paulsdottir said. After years of saving her wages, Brynhild would board the ship Tasso in 1881 to join her older sister Olena and her husband in Chicago, where she would Americanize her name to Bella Peterson. By the time Bella had reached America, the Midwest had been attracting Scandinavian migrants, and Chicago had established itself as an ethnic enclave for Norwegians. This fact would be pivotal to the success of Bella's criminal career. An example of this would be her first husband, Mads Sorensen. Following the adoption of their daughter Jenny, the family pursued the upward socioeconomic success that the new country promised by opening a small candy store on Grand Avenue in Chicago. Unfortunately for the Sorenses, their American dream failed to become a reality as the store was not a success and caught fire on less than a year after its opening. The cause of the flames was attributed by the owners as an exploded kerosene lamp. Although insurance investigators could not find any evidence of said lamp, despite this, the Sorensens were not charged with arson and were given an insurance payout. This fire was the first of many suspicious insurance cases that Bella would involve herself in. Following the payout, the Sorensens moved to a new home in Chicago, which they would fill with 4 more children over the next 2 years. The mysterious acquisition of these children led to rumors of Bella participating in baby farming, due to the high unlikelihood of her and Mads conceiving the children. 2 of these miraculously acquired children would die in their infancy, a baby girl at 5 months and a boy at just 3 months old, both of symptoms that are common in poisoning. Suspicious occurrences would continue for this family when their home burned down on April 10, 1900, which destroyed $650 of goods that were all insured in their entirety. Yet another major insurance payout would find its way to Bella specifically when her husband Mads died suddenly on July 30th, 1900. If this doesn't make you immediately suspicious, you should know that July 30th just happened to be the only day that one life insurance policy worth $2,000 would overlap with the first operative date of a second worth $3,000, both of which Bella was the sole beneficiary. As a family physician questioned Bella about the nature of Matt's death, she blamed the pharmacy for switching quinine with morphine, although she did not have the packaging to prove this theory. Despite the coroner's suspicion, Belle was never brought to trial and the investigation never went beyond this questioning. Using these insurance payouts, Bella bought a large farmstead in northern Indiana, and within months of moving to LaPorte, Our Lady Bluebeard would marry another Norwegian immigrant named Peter Gunness and start a life with him and his 2 young daughters. Just 5 days after the couple's nuptials, Peter's infant daughter would die of edema of the lungs. This did not build a strong case in Bella's defense that 3 infants in her care had passed away from symptoms that could easily be triggered by toxins and medicines that were at the time very accessible to her. Just 8 months after the death of his daughter, Peter Gunness would also lose his life at the farm. In an account of events given by Belle, Peter had obtained a large gash at the top of his head from a meat grinder falling from a shelf in the kitchen as he put on his shoes in the middle of the night, which he kept by the stove. The coroner's jury found the story very unlikely, however, did not have the evidence to charge Belle with murder. Despite this, Peter's brother came to collect his oldest niece and the inheritor of Peter's life insurance policy due to concern for her safety under Belle's care. During her first years in America, Belle could not necessarily use her femininity alone to dodge suspicions, despite her attempts to do so. I would actually argue that it was her status as an immigrant in a roundabout way that helped her out of these specific scenarios. By all accounts, she was very gruff, impersonable, and lacking in Western standards of femininity. During all these investigations, though, she figured out how to use that as a tool. And as you will see after Peter's death, it's really where she figured out her MO and how to work in her womanhood and sexuality into the narrative that she was spinning. In 1905, Belle took up her long-held hobby of placing personal advertisements in Norwegian language newspapers, primarily in the marital section of the Chicago-based newspaper Scandinavian. Additionally, this is around the time that she began a sexual relationship with Ray Lampier and hired him as a full-time farmhand. Her success was only possible through the well-laid trap in the pages of these papers, which read, "Comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts of LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided, with a view of joining fortunes. No replies by a letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. Triflers need not apply." If it was not made clear by the ad, there was one major caveat. Her worthy suitor would need to abandon his previous life, withdraw the entirety of his riches, and waste no time joining her in LaPorte. In exchange, Belle could not only offer her property, but a chance for these men to fulfill their societal duty and find a wife with whom they can make a life in this foreign land. This was especially tempting given the fact that the strong Norwegian woman could offer all the familiar comforts of home that they had so dearly missed since immigrating to the United States. During the years leading up to the fateful conflagration of her farmstead, Belle would lure in a known 5 men to her home with the promise of a wife and a respectable living, with only one confirmed survivor. However, this could very well be a fraction of the people that spoke to Belle, considering the fact that a lot of people came forward once newspapers started publishing her status as a serial killer. The most important in terms of law and historical record, though, is Andrew Helgelin, a South Dakota farmer originally immigrated from Sweden. They began corresponding in 1906, and up until 1908, over the course of those 2 years, Belle worked very hard to convince Andrew to come to the farm. Some of their letters were found and translated in the court hearing of Ray Lampier, and his brother Ale went searching for his brother due to concerns for his safety. Because of this search, Andrew's body was one of the first found in the pig pen and opened up this whole can of worms that is the criminal career of Belle Gunness. Although Belle was clearly money hungry, this motivation cannot account for the totality of the lives which she had taken. It is discussed within the modern historiography that she showed clear signs of sociopathic tendencies. Her letters with Andrew Helgelin showed this. She had plenty of other suitors that were responding to her, and Lampier was still around to give her company, but that just wasn't the point. Helgelin not coming to the farm would be a loss in this convoluted game that Belle was playing, which she just could not allow. I truly believe that Belle understood who she was and how she was perceived. She understood so deeply what the men in her society craved as well. In this case, it truly did not matter if she was young and beautiful and spry. She wasn't trying to be. She was security, she was comfort, especially for these older men responding who did not have the time, money, or social position to actually marry for love. All of that, though, is not to say that she was unattached from her sexuality. In her letters, she is very overtly sexual once her suitor has proven himself worthy, and usually once he shows reluctancy as well. Even with Lampier, she was not this young trophy. She was a bragging point, but in the same way someone would brag about wrestling an alligator on their trip to Florida, less the trip to Disney World. To this day, there are a myriad of unanswered questions surrounding Belle Gunness and the extent of her criminal activities. In studying the events leading up to the arrest of Ray Lampier, her actions seem to reflect how she was seen in the context of the time and places in which she existed. Upon her initial arrival to Chicago, Gunness was on track to become a rags to riches story quintessential to this period of American history. Her questionable accumulation of wealth eventually morphed her public perception, exacerbated by her immigrant status. Gunness clearly understood how to manipulate these otherwise unflattering attributes through her expertly crafted narratives. Although her sexuality was not typically deployed as a selling point for her company, she also understood how to use it and when for her benefit. So although behind closed doors Gunness was fueled by depravity, she was keen on using the expectations placed upon her to her advantage. Female killers like Belle Gunness are exceptionally disturbing because they disrupt the maternal, caring image that defines traditional womanhood. Gunness is particularly interesting because on top of all of this, she is the culmination of changes in American society during this time.